You want to know a term a lot of people in audio throw out, people who mix? They throw this term out there a lot, and it means so little. Learn your room. It means less than probably anything else I could think of. And let me explain why. For years, I would listen to music in my listening position. I would listen to all sorts of different mixes. All that tells me is what a good mix sounds like in a bad position in my room. Because by listening in the position I was sitting in, I was unable to hear certain things in my mixes and in mixes that were great. But because I can't hear it, I can't make adjustments to it. I don't hear there's a problem in that frequency because I'm sitting in a null point. A lot of people spend way more time trying to learn their room than they should be spending. And what they don't do is move within their room enough. That's where you spend your time. Now, this is my opinion, and I'm sure there'll be other people with their opinion. But in my opinion, it only works to learn your room if you have a room that doesn't have problems. All rooms have problems. So depending on the severity of your problems in your room, why start to try to learn your room before you've exhausted every possible permutation of where you could move to make yourself happy when you're listening? The inherent problem with learn your room is that if you're sitting in a place that has a lack of frequencies, no matter what you do with EQ or trim off or room adjustment, it's not going to fix that where you are, you cannot hear certain frequencies. What will fix it is moving. Sometimes moving back 6 inches, a foot could change everything. 2 feet. I move my desk 2 feet closer to the front wall and I hear a ton more low end. Also, the positioning of my speakers. They're approximately 6 feet from me. That makes a difference. So a lot of people have meter bridges or they just put their speakers on their desk. That's the number one problem, in my opinion, for why you can't hear as well as you want, is where your speakers are in relation to where you are. And if you have, NS10s or some Oratones or some little near fields, maybe that'll be okay. But if you have speakers that have low end in them, you want that to develop. You don't want it right up in your face, like super close to you. In my opinion, it doesn't work as well. So by backing up my speakers helped a lot. But don't be afraid to also go against what the rules might be in terms of what's the best. You ask a lot of the top acousticians, they'll tell you, if you're in a rectangular shaped room, face the short wall. I'm telling you that may be the way to go, but if it doesn't work and you move forward and back in that room, you move your speakers forward and back, you adjust the height of the speakers. Not only do you adjust the height, you do it with intention and purpose. Like you grab a laser pointer. You see this thing? You grab a level. You have a buddy, a friend, an assistant, somebody. Put this at your ear, okay? Point this at either the center of the mid-dome or the tweeter if you're on a two-way, and make sure it's level. And then where does this wind up? As soon as you get level, you'll see where your ear really lines up on the speaker. And what I found from doing this is that the speakers have to be significantly higher than I thought. And a lot of that happens just human relative perception. All right. When you put a mic in front of where your mouth is, if you do this to 4 different people, some people, because you don't see in a mirror, you just put it where you think your mouth is. Some people put it way above their mouth, I notice. Some people put it below. It's not like a thing where we could see objectively out in front of us. Some people do it right, but it's rare. I found so many people put the mic too high or too low. I mean, picture Metallica, James Hetfield. He's basically sitting there. His mic is always low, so he leans over to sing into it. Maybe that helps him, but I bet you that somehow started based on he tried singing where he thought the mic was at his mouth level and it was below it. Or he had a crap mic stand which kept sinking on him, one or the other. But I find it interesting how very similarly, where people think their ear would wind up on a speaker is not actually where it is. And for me, I thought that my ear was lower than it was. When I would line this up with a laser pointer and a level, I found that the laser pointer was pointing rather much higher than I thought when the level was in play and I could see what a straight line was. It was actually much higher than I thought, so I wound up adjusting the speaker stands much higher, and it helped a lot for the image I was hearing. So a lot of these things help. Also, if you're not familiar with Room EQ Wizard or something like that, that's like, I think it's a free, I've never used Room EQ Wizard yet because I have the Trinov, but I actually plan on using it just to really make sure that I'm getting what I think I'm getting. And basically, it's like, you could use that and one of these microphones for like $100 and really get a sense of what your room's doing, like in real time. So when you make adjustments, you can see what it's doing. That might help you move around a lot. Also, if you have a subwoofer, you got to understand what the subwoofer crawl is. Now, some people get this wrong. I was talking to somebody recently who thought that his sub needs to go between his speakers in order to get the best sound. It's like, no, it doesn't. Not at all. Sub frequencies are omnidirectional. You could put that sub anywhere in the room. It could be a coffee table back by a chair in the back. It still might be perfect there. And the reason you would know is if you did the crawl, which basically means you take your sub and you put it where you're sitting. Now, it's not as helpful if you put it on the floor. It's better actually if you put it up on a table or something so that the sub is where your ears would be, where your head is, right? So the sub is here. Then you crawl around on the floor and you listen to where it sounds the most balanced to you. Now, there's another human thing that may be a problem. To you, balanced may be a ton more sub than everything else. But if you find the spot where it's the most balanced, which means the amount, I would say, that doesn't make it too much low end and doesn't make it where you can barely hear it. Somewhere where it's balanced, where you get a good amount of what you want of all the frequencies. Then you switch the sub with your head. In other words, your head is here, but when you crawl around on the floor, your head's wherever your head is. So you take that sub and you put it where you marked on the floor sounded the most balanced as you were crawling around and listening. So you're switching places with where your head is. You're putting your head here. Now the sub goes where your head was. Boom. Way more balanced of a low end in the room. Now, I don't like using a sub. The only reason I know this is because I worked for years without a sub. Then I worked with a sub. Then I tried it without a sub again. And I realized I don't like it with a sub. Everybody's different. Everybody here is different. I found clean low end to me is what I'm looking for when I'm mixing. I don't want a ton of it, and I don't want it coming from a sub, which basically really makes it where you feel more of the low end in your chest and in your stomach and everything. But to me, it didn't translate to I can hear it better. It never did that. So keeping all this stuff in mind, figure out the way that works best for you, starting with moving around, rather than spending hours and hours and hours listening to reference mixes before you work, which is something I used to always do. I used to sit down, listen to references as like a way just to gauge where things were. But like I said, if your room doesn't give you the full picture, which is really, it's where you are in your room. I'm not saying your room is terrible. If you've got enough treatment up, or even if you've got a moderate amount of treatment, just moving within the room could still improve what you're hearing significantly. And then once you find the spot where you can make a mix that sounds close to where, when you get into the world, it's very similar to other places, and in your room, it's all predictable. You're like, oh, that is what I was hearing in my room. And then you get to the world, it's the same. Then that's the right position for you. And in order to do that, do a couple mixes. Literally 3 mixes in each spot should give you a good sense of what you were able to hear in that new location. And since there's so many variables, like height of the speakers, distance from the speakers to the wall, you to the speakers, distance that you are sitting between you and the front wall, you and the back wall, height of your chair, like there's so many things we could get into. Just keep the basics in mind, which is generally the center of the room is not the right place. If you can help it, a third into the room, like if you were to break your room into thirds, 1/3 of the way in, if you're sitting there, that's generally better than if you're sitting smack in the middle. So these are all helpful things. Not only between the front and back wall, don't sit in the middle. Between the ceiling and the floor, it's not ideal to be in the middle. So if that means you got to sit a little lower or a little higher, it could benefit what you're hearing also. Now, this is also the thing I wanted to mention. Back in like the 70s, when people would make mixes, it wasn't an option to learn your room. It wasn't really an option because in order to learn your room, you would basically have to like make a mix, check it somewhere, maybe the car, then come back and be like, it needs more of this. And then you eventually get it right after enough back and forths. And then you could hear, okay, I get what I need to do to make it right now. That kind of involves learning your room, but you really kind of couldn't do that when there was no way to get the music from the tape to a way to hear it in the car. A lot of studios weren't running rigs where you could have basically, an out from the console get into an in on the car stereo, hardwired so you could hear the mix. So what people had to do was take more pains and time into moving within their room and to getting things designed properly from the beginning, into really getting as much as they could out of a better listening position so that they could hear what they wanted more. So they can make it where, all right, now I'm hearing music the way I like, at least. Not now everything sounds terrible, so it must be right. They liked the way it sounded. And if they didn't, they would position things differently to be able to achieve a place where, okay, it sounds balanced to me the way I like it. This sounds like it works. And as a result, let me mix like this. And then it wasn't often until they would send it off to be mastered where they would know whether their room was telling them accurate information or not. You get what I'm saying? This wasn't in an era where you could fly up other references to see what other things sounded like. It was way harder to do all that. And we got amazing sounding mixes from that era. Not all, but a lot of great stuff that I still reference to this day because of how amazing it sounds. So it just occurred to me that, nobody's learning their room, but what they are doing is taking the time to make everything perfect in terms of where it should be to get the sound they want. Now, there's no perfect, so I don't want everybody's feathers to get ruffled just by hearing the word, but better than it just wound up because that's how you decided to put your desk and where you're sitting. It could potentially be better than that. So what I'm saying is it takes time, effort, and I'm not trying to diminish that, but that's where you should be spending the time and effort. Don't just try to spend the time and effort listening to tons of mixes it's only going to tell you what a great mix sounds like in your terrible position. Things that are missing from that mix will always be missing, but it won't hurt it necessarily on a great mix. But if your mix is also missing the same things, it could really hurt what you are giving people. It could sound way worse. A great mix is going to sound great no matter where you listen to it. That's why that doesn't help. That's why no matter how many references you listen to or learn, if you're in a null point, it'll still make those sound okay. Your mixes won't sound good. I think, personally, you got to spend the time moving. And it's hard, and nobody wants to do it. And you got wires and all this stuff. That's why it's like, break your rig down to the smallest possible rig you could do when you do this so that you have the least amount of things to move around. And then as you're moving and you find the place you like, then you can reconnect all your stuff. But you really just need a way to move into a new location and try it, to see what you're hearing, to see if you can get the right amount of a balanced signal coming at you, which will make it where in the mix you can be balanced. Because if you're hearing very little low end, and that's what you need to hear in order to make a good mix, in my opinion, you're never going to be able to make that work. To you, you're always going to say to yourself, I need this to sound bad to me, thin to me, terrible to me. And then when it does, I know that worked in the car. Who would want to mix like that? Who would want to work like that? Don't you want it to sound good to you and then also work everywhere else so you're actually making decisions based on the way you feel about what you should be doing, not trying to make some translation where you go against the grain of all your opinions and taste and what you like? Why would you want to do that? So move within the room, try different ways that you could be set up, and don't be afraid to spend a long time figuring this out, because I'm telling you, you're going to save tons of time in the long run. For everyone who's on deadlines and can't do it, or you built your room and it can only be one way because of the shape or the whatever, it's unfortunate, but you wind up then having to deal with a lot more issues than somebody who can move within the room. That's ultimately why I moved into this room, because I couldn't move my spot any other way in the place I was, and it was never really sounding the way I wanted it to sound, ever. I couldn't get closer to the wall, couldn't get further away, and I couldn't turn. So I was like, I'm boxed in. And if that's the case, I feel for you. But the point is, maybe there's still something you could do because every room is different. So if you just need to spitball ideas, you know, throw something in the comments, questions, answers, whatever. I'm happy to get back to you. If you want to do a consultation on different ideas. At this point, I've spoken to the top acousticians about how to solve problems, about how to get the most out of my speakers. And there's so many things I'd like to put in this video to help you. But literally, it's a giant amount of what to know that goes into making this where it works rather than it doesn't. I mean, even something little like the Trinov microphone, if you're familiar, looks like this. It's got 4 capsules. Do you know how long I use this microphone? And for some reason, I put it behind my head, like right back here, because that is actually something I got from another piece of information, but it's not right for where the Trinov should go. What I found, and I found this after speaking with Haverstick, the top acoustician, the guy's basically like, look, that microphone should be where your head is. The triangle point where you measure distance between the speakers and then and to your listening position, that point of that triangle is behind your head. So your head is actually inside of the triangle. But that measuring tool, that microphone, should be where your head is, where your face is, not behind your head. And as soon as I changed that, made a huge difference in what I was able to hear. So that's something people get wrong. They measure between their speakers and they match that up with where their head is, but they could put that point here, and that's wrong. That should be behind your head, but your head should also be inside the triangle so that the 2 points, the 2 sides of the triangle basically intersect with your ears and get to the back over here. That's where it would be to measure distance from speakers to get your equilateral triangle to the point behind your head. But then your head goes inside the triangle is where your head should be, and the measuring tool should be where your head is. Now, what I found is also helpful is I took multiple measurements. I got one up close because I like to sit on my elbows up, like where I'm close to the SSL UF8. I'm close to the the UC1, I mean, and the UF8. I'm closer to it. So I get like up here, and I'll spend a lot of the mix on my elbows. So this is one measurement. And then I have one where I'm chilling, which is way back here. And this is another. And as I switch between positions, it's amazing how much difference I can hear just by switching between those 2 presets on the Trinov. Huge difference. And for me, that is like a substitute for another set of speakers because it gives me a different picture by moving. But you know what? If I were to use the close measurement and be back here, it wouldn't work. Not as well is what I found. And if I'm using that back measurement over here, it doesn't work. So not as well. Does it work? Yes. But once you hear the difference of how it works when you have it set to where your head was, it makes a huge difference, I found, especially to low end and to how much you can hear of the frequency, the places in the frequency spectrum that are the hardest to hear. That's what I found. And that's a great line that I love. I love that line, which I didn't come up with, but it's a great line. It's not hard to mix low end. It's hard to hear low end in a room that's not treated well and in a position within that room that might be in a null point. It's hard to hear low end. It's not hard to mix it. Once you can hear it, it's easy to mix it. And you often have to do way less than you're thinking or way less than you're doing. All you got to do is hear it. So just doing things like this, in my opinion, gets you to a place where you can hear better, which means you can mix better. That's why it's worth the time. And don't go into it with the negative mindset thinking, how am I ever going to get this right? There's too many variables. It's too hard to move around. You need to go into it knowing you will be able to tell based on your mixes that you do. That's why I say do like 3 mixes in each spot. You could do 2 if you want, but I think 3 is kind of a magic number, 2 to 3, because that gives you a good sense of like, did I just get it right this one time because I guessed, or did I get it right because I could really hear the difference? Did I get the balance right? And when you do that, you'll be able to tell based on those 3 mixes you've done, is it more balanced? Can I hear better? To me, that makes a difference. And also, it couldn't hurt to listen to references in the different positions as well. Because if in one position you hear more low end on all your references or something, well, you may be in a position that's much more balanced within that room. And the likelihood that you won't know it when you get there, I'm telling you, you will. Just have a little faith, a little positivity, and I'm telling you, you will. That makes way, way, way more sense than learn your room by just staying in the same spot and trying to learn your room. Because I'm telling you, there's people who do that for years and are sitting in a null point, and you wouldn't know it until you moved out of that spot to another place, and now it sounds better to you. I'm telling you. So try that, all right? Try that. And anytime people tell you, just listen to references or whatever, like I said, that tip is not worth as much as it could be worth if they were instead saying, really move around the room. Don't be scared. You're not losing anything by facing a different way than you thought you were going to be facing originally when you set the room up, or where the wires come in for your patch bay, or where the glass is set up so you could see into the other room or through a window. We all want to look out a window. That's really important to some people. For me, after working for years with no window, I want to look out a window. Absolutely. So do I prefer to look out a window though, or get better sounding mixes? It's worth trying both just to make sure you're on the right path. You may decide the better mixes is what's really important, and then you'll move something to be able to look out the window for the time that you're not mixing or something. But what I'm saying is you got to really decide what's important. And all the rules that apply to a lot of places, if you don't take into account all the variables, the rules don't matter. That's why facing the short wall is what they tell you to do. But if you can't get a good sounding mix there, no matter what you do, and you're sitting in a place where you cannot hear a certain amount of low end and you want more, you may want to flip to the other wall, face the long wall, go against what they're telling you, because that could help. Because the anomalies in the room determine so much, and you can't just go by rules that don't take into account all those different anomalies within the room. That's the hardest part about this, and not everybody has it in the budget to have a pro acoustician come out, do the measurements, assess the problems, look at all the anomalies. It's not always in the budget, and I get it. So you sort of have to try more things. That's how you get around that, in my opinion. If you try enough things, you will definitely find a way that works for you. My opinion. So I hope you guys dig it. Leave a comment. Hit the subscribe button if you haven't. I appreciate it. Evan Jaffe, Custom Cut Studios. You guys got this. Take it easy.